As the marketing director for SK Innovations, Do-hyun was used to business trips. This one to Singapore was just like any other, a 3-day conference on sustainable energy solutions, some client meetings, then back home to Seoul. Nothing. Unusual. He'd packed light, just his carry-on suitcase and the leather briefcase his wife Nari had given him for their 5th anniversary. The familiar feeling crept up as he joined the check-in line. First came the glances, quick at first, then lingering, then the whispers. A child pointed at him before being scolded by an embarrassed mother. Do-hyun pretended not to notice, scrolling through emails on his phone instead. "Is that a basketball player?" he heard someone whisper in Korean. "Maybe he's American," another voice replied. Do-hyun had grown up in Busan, had never even left South Korea until college, and played terrible basketball. But his height always sparked these assumptions. He'd learned to live with the stares since middle school, when he'd shot up like a bamboo stalk, towering over classmates and even teachers. The line moved slowly. Do-hyun thought about the presentation slides he'd finalized last night. The Singapore team would expect something impressive, and he hoped his ideas about renewable packaging would win them over. His boss had made it clear, land this client or don't bother coming back. "Next, please," called the airline attendant, her professional smile widening slightly as she looked up at Do-hyun. "Good morning," he said, sliding his passport and booking confirmation across the counter. "Flight SK-119 to Singapore, that bar." Woman typed quickly, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. "Window or aisle seat, Mr. Kim?" "Aisle, please," Do-hyun replied. "Always the aisle." His knees couldn't handle being crammed against the window, even in business class. As she processed his boarding pass, Do-hyun noticed 3 teenagers taking selfies, angling their phones to get him in the background. He turned slightly away, a practiced move to avoid becoming someone's social media curiosity. "Your boarding pass, Mr. Kim. Gate 42, boarding begins at 7:15. Do-hyun nodded his thanks and headed toward security. The morning crowd had thickened, and he could feel more eyes following him. A group of elderly women whispered behind their hands. As he passed, 2 airport staff members glanced his way and spoke quietly to each other. He'd once asked Nari if he was just being paranoid about all the attention. "So you're not imagining things," she'd said gently. "But it's not always bad attention. You're striking. People notice striking things." Security loomed ahead, the part of traveling he dreaded most. He joined the growing line, placing his briefcase on the floor between his feet. He checked his messages one last time before he'd have to put his phone away. A text from Nari. "Knock them dead in Singapore. Bring back those chili crab noodles I love. Miss you already." A small smile crossed his face as he typed back, "Miss you more. Tell Min-jun I'll help with his science project when I'm back." Their son was building a model of the solar system, and Do-hyun had promised to help paint the planets. Another business trip, another missed opportunity with his 7-year-old. The familiar guilt twisted in his stomach. The line shuffled forward. Do-hyun noticed a security agent watching him, eyes narrowed slightly. He straightened his posture and kept his expression, neutral, pushing away the unease that always came in these moments. Just another business trip, he told himself. Check in, fly out, nail the presentation, fly home. Simple. But as the security agent's gaze lingered on him, Do-hyun couldn't shake the feeling that this trip might be different. Do-hyun stood in the security line, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His watch showed 6:30 a.m. Still plenty of time before boarding, but the line moved slowly. He watched as travelers placed laptops in bins, removed belts, and walked through the metal detectors without issue. But something caught his eye. A security agent with a stern face and thinning hair kept pulling certain people aside. First, a middle-aged woman wearing a headscarf, then a bearded man in a business suit, next a college-aged boy with dark skin. Each time the agent would say the same thing. Random security check. Do-hyun frowned. These checks didn't look random at all. The pattern was becoming clear to anyone paying attention. He glanced around, wondering if others noticed. But most. Travelers were lost in their phones or hurrying to their gates. The line inched forward. Do-hyun removed his belt, placed his briefcase and carry-on bag on the conveyor belt, and put his phone and wallet in a small bin. Just as he was about to walk through the metal detector, The stern-faced agent stepped in front of him. "Step aside, please," the agent said. No explanation, no random security check line this time. Do-hyun blinked. "Is there a problem?" "Just step aside, sir." The agent's voice was flat, his eyes never quite meeting Do-hyun's. Other travelers slowed down to watch. Do-hyun felt heat rising in his neck as he moved to the designated area. Behind him, a white businessman walked through without being stopped. Female agent approached with a handheld metal detector. "Arms out, please." Do-hyun complied, stretching his long arms while balancing on slightly wobbly legs. The device beeped near his wrist. "Your watch," she said. He removed his watch, a gift from his team after closing a major deal last year. The agent ran the detector over him again, slowly and carefully, as if expecting to find something. "What exactly are you looking for?" Do-hyun asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Standard procedure," she replied without looking up. The stern-faced agent reappeared. "We'll need to check your bags as well." Do-hyun watched as they pulled his neatly packed suitcase apart. Shirts, carefully folded by Nari the night before, were shaken out. His toiletry bag was opened, each item examined. His heart sank when they reached for his briefcase. "Those are confidential company documents," he said, stepping forward. "Sir, please stay where you are." The stern agent's voice hardened. People were definitely staring now. A small crowd had formed, their morning routines momentarily forgotten in favor of this unexpected airport drama. Some pretended not to watch, glancing sideways while collecting their belongings. Others didn't bother hiding their curiosity. The agents rifled through his presentation materials, flipping through pages of marketing strategies and financial projections that had taken weeks to prepare. His stomach knotted as they handled the documents roughly. "Is this really necessary?" Do-hyun asked, his professional calm beginning to crack. "My flight board's in 40 minutes. "This won't take long if you cooperate," the female agent said, not unkindly. The stern agent pulled out Do-hyun's family photo, Nari and Min-jun smiling at the beach last summer. He studied it longer than necessary before setting it aside. Next came Do-hyun's medication for his mild hypertension. Do-hyun checked his watch as he walked through the sliding doors of Incheon International Airport. 6 in the morning, and already the place buzzed with travelers. At 6'8", he towered over most people, his broad shoulders and confident stride making him stand out even more. He adjusted his navy blue tie and straightened the lapels of his tailored grey suit, a small ritual that helped calm his nerves before important meetings. "What's this for?" the agent demanded. "Blood pressure medication prescribed by my doctor." Do-hyun's own blood pressure was surely rising by the minute. A young man passing by muttered something that sounded like "typical." Do-hyun felt his chest tighten. 20 minutes had passed. His perfectly organized suitcase was now a mess. The agents had gone through everything, even checking the seams of his luggage. Nothing suspicious was found because there was nothing to find. Finally, the female agent nodded. "You can repack your things now." No apology, no explanation. Do-hyun knelt down to reorganize his belongings, aware of the eyes still watching him. His hands trembled slightly as he folded his clothes. The pristine documents were now crumpled at the edges. His meeting was in 6 hours and he'd have to reprint everything at the hotel. As he repacked, a small boy pointed at him. "Mum, what did that tall man do wrong?" The mother hushed her child, pulling him away with an embarrassed glance at Do-hyun. That's when it hit him. In the eyes of everyone watching, he was guilty of something. Why else would he be singled out? The security check had branded him, even without finding anything. Do-hyun zipped up his suitcase and straightened his tie. The knot felt too tight against his throat, but he resisted the urge to loosen it. He needed to look composed, professional. He'd worked too hard to let this moment break him. As he walked away from security, he felt a burning sensation in his chest that had nothing to do with his blood pressure. The familiar stares now carried a different weight. He wasn't just the tall Korean man anymore. He was the tall Korean man who'd been pulled aside, searched, and treated like a threat. He checked his watch again. He still had time to make his flight, but something had been lost that couldn't be reclaimed with a quick glance at the time. His dignity, at least for now. Do-hyun grabbed his carry-on suitcase and briefcase from the conveyor belt, hands still trembling slightly. his perfectly pressed suit felt wrinkled now, not just from the invasive search but from the weight of all those stairs. He checked his watch again. Still 25 minutes until boarding, but he needed a moment to collect himself before facing anyone else. He found a quiet corner near his gate and sat down, taking slow breaths to calm his racing heart. As he was straightening the papers in his briefcase, a woman approached him. She was slim, with short dark hair, wearing a tailored black pantsuit and carrying a sleek leather messenger bag. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but clear. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I saw what happened at security." Do-hyun looked up, slightly wary. More curious onlookers. But there was something different about her expression, not pity or curiosity, but a focused intensity. "I'm Jia," she said, extending her hand. "I'm an attorney with the Civil Liberties Coalition." Do-hyun hesitated, then shook her hand. "Do-hyun Kim, Marketing Executive." "May I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. When he nodded, she continued, "What happened to you back there wasn't random. I've been monitoring this checkpoint for 3 months now." She opened her messenger bag and pulled out a small notebook. "I've documented 47 similar incidents at this specific checkpoint since February. The same security officer who pulled you aside has been involved in 32 of them." Do-hyun's eyebrows rose. "You've been counting?" Jia nodded. "I'm building a case file on discriminatory screening practices. The TSA has policies against profiling based on race, religion, or national origin. But the implementation," she shook her head, "what they did to you fits a pattern I've been seeing." "I thought it was just bad luck," Do-hyun said quietly. "It wasn't luck," Jia replied. "Did you notice who went through without additional screening while you were being searched?" Do-hyun nodded slowly. "Several businessmen, a couple with a baby, an elderly woman. And did you notice any differences between them and the other people who were pulled aside?" The realization washed over Do-hyun. He had noticed, of course, but had tried not to think about it. All of us who were searched were not white. "Exactly," Jia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced around and then leaned closer. "I saw them go through your presentation materials. That seemed particularly unnecessary and invasive." Do-hyun felt a flash of anger, remembering how they'd handled his documents. They said it was standard procedure. "It's not," Jia said firmly, "and I have the documentation to prove it." She flipped through her notebook, showing him pages of meticulous notes, dates, times, descriptions of passengers who were stopped, which officers were involved, how long each search took. "Why are you doing this?" Do-hyun asked. "Are you working on some kind of lawsuit?" Jia closed her notebook. "I'm heading to a civil rights conference in Singapore. My organization works on cases of institutional discrimination. Airport security is just one of our focus areas, but it's one where we've seen a dramatic increase in complaints." She pulled a business card from her pocket and handed it to him. "The system only changes when people speak up. Most travelers who experience what you just did simply want to forget about it and move on. They don't file complaints, they don't document what happened, and so the pattern continues." Do-hyun studied the card. It was simple but professional. Jia Park, Senior Attorney, Civil Liberties Coalition. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he asked. "I'm not suggesting anything," Jia said carefully. "I'm simply sharing information. You have the right to file a formal complaint about how you were treated. The Transportation Security Administration has a civil rights office specifically for this purpose. Most people don't know that." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a small pamphlet. "This explains the process. It also explains your rights during screening." Do-hyun took the pamphlet, turning it over in his hands. "Do these complaints actually accomplish anything?" Jia's expression was serious. Individual complaints might not seem to make a difference, but patterns of complaints, those become harder to ignore, especially when they're well documented. She glanced at her watch. "My flight board's in 10 minutes. I should go." She stood, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "It was nice to meet you, Do-hyun, though I wish it had been under different circumstances." As she turned to leave, Do-hyun called after her, "Jia, are you also going to the Asia-Pacific Marketing Summit?" She smiled. "I am. Our panel on corporate responsibility and civil rights is tomorrow afternoon. Maybe I'll see you there, Do-hyun said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. I'd like that, she replied. And Do-hyun, whatever you decide to do about today, it's your choice. But know that you're not alone in this experience, and you don't have to accept it as normal. As she walked away, Do-hyun opened the pamphlet. On the first page in bold letters were the words, "Your rights matter. Your voice matters." He thought about his son, Min-jun, who at 7 was already starting to notice when people treated him differently. What kind of world did he want his son to grow up in? He carefully placed the pamphlet and Gia's business card in his briefcase. He had a lot to think about during this flight, and perhaps a decision to make when he landed. The Singapore Airlines flight was quiet, most passengers either sleeping or watching movies on their screens. Do-hyun stared out the window at the endless darkness, his mind still replaying the events at the security checkpoint. Normally by now, he would have pushed the incident aside, focusing instead on his presentation for tomorrow. But this time felt different. He pulled out his tablet and opened his email. Gia's business card sat on the tray table beside him. She had sent him information about filing a formal complaint, just as she promised. Do-hyun scrolled through the document, surprised by how thorough it was. "Can I get you anything, sir?" The flight attendant's voice startled him. "Just water, please," Do-hyun answered, minimizing the email. When she returned with his drink, he found himself asking, "Do you ever see passengers being treated differently?" "Had security checkpoints." The flight attendant paused, her professional smile faltering slightly. "I've been flying for 15 years, she said quietly. "I've seen a lot." After she moved on, Do-hyun reopened the email and continued reading. There were forms to fill out, agencies to contact, details to document. It seemed overwhelming. Was it really worth the effort? By the time any complaint was processed, he'd be back in Seoul, far from that particular airport and that particular security agent. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight entered its night cycle. Do-hyun closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he thought about his son. Last month, Min-jun had come home from school upset. Some kids had pulled their eyes into slits and asked if he could even see through those eyes. When Do-hyun had asked what he did about it, Min-jun had shrugged and said, "Nothing. I just walked away." Do-hyun had praised him for not getting into trouble. But later that night, he'd wondered if he'd given his son the right advice. Was walking away always the answer? His own parents had taught him the same. Keep your head down, work twice as hard, don't make waves. It had served him well in his career, but at what cost? The memory of his briefcase being roughly searched flashed in his mind again. The important presentation he'd worked on for weeks, tossed around like trash. The stares from other travelers. The humiliation. Do-hyun opened a new document on his tablet and began typing, forcing himself to recall every detail of the incident. The time, the security lane number, the agent's name from his badge, the specific questions he'd been asked that others hadn't, the way his belongings had been searched, how long he'd been detained while others passed through. It was difficult to write, each detail bringing back the anger and humiliation, but it was also strangely cathartic, putting the experience into words. By the time he finished, the document was 3 pages long. He saved it, then opened the complaint form Gia had sent. The form asked for basic information: name, contact details, date of incident. Then it asked for a description of what happened. Do-hyun pasted in his account, reading it over once more before continuing. There was a section asking if he believed he had been discriminated against, and if so, on what basis. Do-hyun's finger hovered over the screen. For years, he'd trained himself not to see patterns in how he was treated. It was easier that way, safer. But Gia's words echoed in his mind. Patterns of complaints become harder to ignore. Do-hyun checked the boxes for race and national origin. In the additional comments section, he wrote, "I am a business executive who has traveled through dozens of airports globally. I recognize the need for security screening. What I experienced today was not standard procedure. It was targeted, invasive, and demeaning. No explanation was provided for why I was singled out while others were not. I am filing this complaint not only for myself, but for others who may not have the language skills or resources to speak up." His finger hesitated over the submit button. Once he pressed it, there would be a record. His name would be in a system. Would this create problems for him on future trips? Would he face retaliation? Then he thought of his son again. What would he tell Minjun when he was older and asked why some people were treated differently? Would he advise him to stay quiet, to accept injustice as simply the cost of moving through the world? The cabin was completely dark now, except for the glow of his screen. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, between his old life and whatever came next, Do-hyun pressed submit. The confirmation appeared immediately. Your complaint has been received. Case number TSA 2025-05741. Do-hyun stared at the number. His complaint. His voice. He felt a strange mixture of anxiety and relief, like he'd just stepped off a very high ledge and found solid ground beneath him. He forwarded the confirmation to Jia with a brief note. I did it. Thank you for your guidance. Then he turned off his tablet and leaned back in his seat. For the first time since the incident, his mind felt clear. Tomorrow he would nail his presentation. He would check in with Nari and Minjun. And when he returned to Seoul, he would tell his son that sometimes walking away isn't the answer. Sometimes you had to stand your ground, even when it was scary. Say especially when it was scary. As the plane carried him towards Singapore, Do-hyun realized he felt something he hadn't felt in the security line, or even afterward. Pride. Not in his accomplishments or his position, but in himself. For the first time in years, maybe ever, he hadn't just accepted the unacceptable. He had spoken up. Whatever happened with the complaint, whether it led to any real change or simply disappeared into bureaucratic oblivion, Do-hyun knew this moment marked a shift in him. He had chosen to be visible in a new way. Not just as someone to be scrutinized, but as someone who could scrutinize back. Someone who could say, this is wrong and I will not pretend otherwise. The flight attendant passed by again, noticing he was still awake. Trouble sleeping? She asked. No, Do-hyun replied with a small smile. Actually, I think I'll sleep very well now. Do-hyun stared at the email on his screen, reading it for the third time to make sure he wasn't missing anything. 3 weeks had passed since he'd filed his complaint about the security incident at Incheon International Airport. 3 weeks of going about his normal routine, client meetings, strategy sessions, helping Minjun with his science project, family dinners with Nari. 3 weeks during which he'd almost convinced himself that his complaint had disappeared into some bureaucratic void never to be addressed. But here it was. A formal response from the Airport Authority's Office of Civil Rights. Dear Mr. Kim, we are writing to inform you that following your complaint, case CHAM TSA 2025-05741, we have conducted a thorough investigation of the incident you reported on May 15, 2025. Our findings indicate that there were indeed procedural violations during your screening process. The email went on to detail how they had reviewed security footage, interviewed staff, and examined records of other similar complaints. Their conclusion was that the officer in question had exhibited a pattern of selecting certain passengers for additional screening based on factors unrelated to security risks. Do-hyun's phone rang, startling him out of his thoughts. It was Jia. Did you get it? She asked without preamble. I did, Do-hyun replied. I'm still processing it. I told you your complaint would make a difference, Jia said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. But this is even better than I expected. They're implementing a full training program, and they want me to be part of it, Do-hyun said, still sounding stunned. I'm not sure why. I'm a marketing executive, not a security expert. You have something much more valuable than security expertise, Jia replied. You have first-hand experience as someone who was profiled, and you have the communication skills to articulate that experience effectively. That's exactly what they need. Do-hyun glanced at the calendar on his wall. The training sessions would start next month. Could he really make time for this alongside his regular job? I don't know, Jia. I filed the complaint because it was the right thing to do, but getting involved further, that's a bigger commitment. Think about it, she said. This is a chance to transform what happened to you into something positive. How often does that opportunity come along? After they hung up, Do-hyun sat silently at his desk. Through the window, he could see Seoul's skyline, the afternoon sun glinting off glass buildings. His mind drifted back to the airport, to the feeling of humiliation as his belongings were searched in front of curious onlookers. That evening he shared the news with Nari over dinner after Minjun had gone to bed. "They want you to help train their staff," she asked, setting down her glass. "That's unexpected." "Apparently my complaint triggered a bigger investigation," Do-hyun explained. "They found similar incidents involving the same security personnel. There's going to be mandatory anti-bias training for all security staff, and they want me to consult on the program." Nari studied his face. "Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. It would mean extra work, time away from you and Minjun. But it would also mean helping to ensure other people don't go through what you experienced," she pointed out. Do-hyun nodded slowly. "That's what Jia said too." "She sounds wise," Nari said with a small smile. "I think you should consider it." 2. Days later, Do-hyun found himself in a conference room at the Airport Administration Building. The Director of Security Operations, Hyun-woo, greeted him with a bow and a firm handshake. "Mr. Kim, thank you for coming. Your insights will be invaluable to our efforts." Around the table sat a diverse group, a behavioral psychologist, 2 training, specialists, a civil rights lawyer, not Jia but someone from the airport's legal team, and 3 security supervisors who looked slightly uncomfortable. "Mr. Kim has agreed to share his experience with us," Hyun-woo explained to the group. "His perspective as someone who experienced inappropriate screening procedures will help us develop more effective training protocols." For the next 2 hours, they listened as Do-hyun recounted his experience in detail: the initial stop, the invasive search, the humiliation, the stares from other travelers. He spoke calmly but didn't soften the impact of what had happened. The security supervisors shifted in their seats. One took extensive notes. "What would have made the situation better?" the psychologist asked when he finished. Do-hyun considered. "This. Transparency," he said finally. "If there had been a clear reason for selecting me, if that reason had been explained respectfully, if the search had been conducted with more privacy and professionalism." He paused. "But most importantly, if I hadn't been singled out because of how I look in the first place." Over the following weeks, Do-hyun participated in several more planning sessions. He reviewed training materials, suggested changes to screening, protocols, and even helped develop a workshop on unconscious bias. The program they created wasn't just about avoiding discrimination. It was about recognizing that effective security required treating all travelers with respect and dignity. A month later, Do-hyun stood before a room of 50 security personnel, many looking skeptical as he was introduced. "I'm not here to criticize you," he began, sensing their defensiveness. "I understand your job is difficult and vital. You're responsible for keeping thousands of people safe every day, often with limited time to make decisions." He saw a few nods of acknowledgement. "But I want to share what it feels like to be on the other side of those decisions when they're made for the wrong reasons." As he spoke, he watched their expressions change. Some remained guarded, but others showed genuine interest, even concern. By the end of his presentation, hands were raised with questions that showed they were engaging with the issue in ways they hadn't before. One security officer, a woman in her 40s, approached him afterward. "I never thought about how it feels. For the passenger," she admitted. "We're so focused on looking for threats that sometimes we forget we're dealing with people." 6 months later, Do-hyun received an email from Hyun-woo with a report attached. The data showed a 40% reduction in passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment since implementing the new training program. More importantly, there had been no decrease in security effectiveness. In fact, there were modest improvements in detection rates for actual prohibited items. "Your contribution has made a real difference," Hyun-woo wrote. "We are now being asked to share our training program with other airports across Asia." That evening, Do-hyun sat with Minjun, helping him with his homework. The boy was struggling with a math problem, growing increasingly frustrated. "I can't do it," he muttered, ready to give up. "Yes, you can," Do-hyun said gently. "Sometimes the hardest problems lead to the most important solutions. Minjun looked up at him, suddenly curious. Like what? Do-hyun thought about the journey from that humiliating moment at the security checkpoint to helping reshape training for hundreds of security personnel. Like standing up when something isn't right, he said, and then working to make it better, even when it's difficult. Did you do that? Minjun asked. I'm trying, Do-hyun replied with a smile. Let's solve this problem together. As they bent over the textbook, Do-hyun felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What had begun as an act of personal dignity, filing that complaint instead of staying silent, had rippled outward in ways he could never have predicted. The system wasn't perfect, and change was still ongoing, but it was moving in the right direction. And perhaps most importantly, when Minjun faced injustice in his own life, Do-hyun would be able to tell him not just to stand up for himself, but to be part of making things better for others. Sometimes he now knew firsthand, painful encounters could transform into opportunities for change that reached far beyond one person's experience.